In the spring of 1982, a film opened in American theaters that nobody in Hollywood was fully prepared for. It starred a bodybuilder who could barely speak English on camera, a Broadway dancer who had never fired a bow, a champion surfer who had never read a script, and a supporting cast built almost entirely out of athletes, strongmen, and stuntmen rather than trained actors. Somehow, against every reasonable expectation, it worked. Conan the Barbarian became one of the defining fantasy films of its decade, and it turned a 34-year-old former Mr. Olympia named Arnold Schwarzenegger into a movie star. More than 4 decades later, the film still gets watched, quoted, and argued about. Its blend of pulpy sword and sorcery spectacle with a genuinely serious visual style, a thundering Basil Polidori score, and a screenplay co-written by Milius and Oliver Stone gave it a weight that most fantasy films of the era never bothered to reach for. But the people who made it happen have scattered into very different lives. Some of them still famous, some of them almost completely forgotten, and some of them gone far too soon. Today we're going to the main cast of the 1982 Conan the Barbarian, one by one, to see what happened to them after the camera stopped rolling, who is still with us, and which of these stories quietly turned into tragedy while nobody outside their immediate circle was paying attention. What makes this cast so unusual, even by Hollywood standards, is how few of them were actually trained actors when filming began. Milius deliberately built much of the movie around real athletes and real physiques, rather than performers doing an impression of physicality, and that decision shaped almost every story on this list. A champion surfer, a Broadway dancer, a former NFL defensive end, and a pair of championship bodybuilders all found themselves standing next to some of the most respected character actors of the 20th century on a production shot largely on location in Spain under grueling physical conditions. That collision of backgrounds is part why the film still feels different from its imitators, and it's also why the where they now story of this particular cast is so much wider-ranging than most. We'll start with a man who spent half the movie standing shoulder to shoulder with Schwarzenegger, playing Conan's closest friend in comic foil, the light-footed Hyrcanian archer and thief named Subotai. The actor's name was Jerry Lopez, and in 1982, almost nobody watching film in the theater had any idea that the calm, grinning warrior on screen was, in real life, one of the most influential surfers who had ever lived. Lopez was born in Honolulu in November 1948, and by his early teens, he was already the Hawaii State Junior Surfing Champion. He went on to become the reigning master of the Banzai Pipeline on Oahu's North Shore, a wave so dangerous and so unforgiving that it has claimed the lives of numerous surfers over the decades. Lopez rode it with a stillness and economy of movement that earned him the nickname Mr. Pipeline, and in 1970 he co-founded Lightning Bolt Surfboards, a brand whose Jaguar logo became one of the most recognizable symbols in surf culture to the 1970s. His connection to Conan the Barbarian traces back to director John Milius, himself a passionate surfer who had cast Lopez in an earlier film, Big Wednesday, and who wanted Subotai to be played by a real athlete rather than an actor imitating one. Lopez had grown up loving Robert E. Howard's Conan stories and the Frank Frazetta artwork that accompanied them, so when Milius offered him the part, it felt less like an odd career detour and more like stepping into a world he already knew. The physical chemistry between Lopez and Schwarzenegger on screen came from something real. Two men who had trained their bodies for entirely different purposes, finding a shared rhythm in the fight choreography. After Conan, Lopez continued to act occasionally, most notably as the surf mentor Vince in the 1987 film North Shore, but his life's work never really left the ocean. Today, in his late 70s, Lopez lives in Bend, Oregon, where he has spent decades shaping surfboards and, more recently, snowboards by hand. He moved his family and his board-shaping business there from Hawaii in the early 2000s, and he has been recognized for that work with honors, including the Waterman of the Year Award from the Surf Industry Manufacturers Association and induction into the Surfers Hall of Fame. He teaches yoga, writes about meditation and wave riding, and rarely gives interviews, preferring a quiet life away from both the surf industry spotlight and the Conan fan convention circuit. When he does sit down for one, as he did for an oral history of the film production, he tends to talk about Subotai with the same understated modesty he brings to talking about riding the pipeline. Of everyone on this list, he may be the person who walked furthest away from Hollywood and never looked back. The next figure on our list towered, quite literally, over most of the cast, playing Thulsa Doom's hammer-wielding Lieutenant Thorgrim. The warrior Conan kills in a climactic temple battle. The actor behind the role was Sven-Ole Thorsen, a Danish strongman, bodybuilder, and karate black belt who, by the time Conan wrapped, had already become one of Arnold Schwarzenegger's closest friends. Thorsen was born in Copenhagen in 1944 and built his reputation in Denmark as a champion powerlifter and bodybuilder before crossing paths with Schwarzenegger through the European bodybuilding scene in the 1970s. When Schwarzenegger began landing film roles substantial enough to bring old training partners along for the ride, Thorsen was one of the friends who came with him. Started with Conan and continued across more than a dozen films over the following decades, including Predator, The Running Man, Twins, Red Heat, and Last Action Hero. He even turned up decades later as the gladiator Tigress of Gaul, going toe-to-toe with Russell Crowe in Ridley Scott's Gladiator, a role he reportedly pursued for over a year before. Winning it, Thorsen eventually relocated permanently to the United States in 1985, and for years he split his time between Santa Monica, California, and his home country of Denmark, where he had already made a name for himself as a founder of the Danish Bodybuilding Federation and, in 1983, as the winner of Denmark's Strongest Man competition. His filmography grew to include appearances outside the Schwarzenegger universe as well, from Lethal Weapon to The Hunt for Red October to The Quick and the Dead, and he spent years working simultaneously as an actor, a stuntman, and an unofficial physical trainer on Schwarzenegger's productions. He largely stepped back from acting around 2009, though he still turns up occasionally for stunt work, voice roles, or fan appearances, and he published a well-received Danish-language autobiography, Sterk Man i Hollywood, or Strong Man in Hollywood, that reportedly sold out its first printing within a day. Now in his early 80s, Thorsen remains a well-known face on the convention circuit, still closely associated with a man whose career he shadowed for the better part of 40 years. Few actors in this film carried more weight, in every sense of the word, than the man who played King Osric, the weary monarch who hires Conan and Subbatai to rescue his daughter. That role belonged to Max von Sydow, and by the time he arrived on the Conan set, he had already lived one of the most respected careers in European and American cinema. Von Sydow had built his reputation through 11 films with Ingmar Bergman, including the iconic image of a knight playing chess against death in The Seventh Seal. American audiences knew him as the priest in The Exorcist, one of the defining horror performances of the 1970s, and as Jesus in George Stevens' The Greatest Story Ever Told. By his own account, he simply liked working, and that appetite for the craft never really faded. His single extended scene in Conan the Barbarian, pleading with Conan and his companions to save his daughter, is often cited by fans as the emotional hinge that makes the rest of the film's brutality land with any weight. Von Sydow was famously candid in interviews about the fact that he never set out as a child to become a film actor at all. He described drifting into the theater almost by circumstance, through school trips to see touring productions that happened to pass through his hometown, and finding that the stage simply suited him. That mix of accident and dedication defined much of his working life, and it's part of why his filmography reads less like a strategic career plan and more like the record of a man who consistently said yes to interesting work, regardless of budget or genre, for over 60 years. Von Sydow's career continued for nearly 4 more decades after Conan. He earned a second Academy Award nomination at age 82 for Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close, a role in which he never spoke a single word. He later appeared as a mysterious three-eyed raven in Game of Thrones and as a minor but memorable presence in Star Wars: The Force Awakens, giving him a filmography that stretched across roughly 6 decades of world cinema. Max von Sydow died on March 8, 2020, at his home in Provence, France, at the age of 90, a long, dignified career that few actors in any country ever get to have. The role of the mysterious witch who seduces Conan in a burned-out cottage and then transforms his arms is a brief one, lasting only a few minutes of screen time, but it left a lasting impression on audiences in 1982. The actress was credited as Cassandra Gaviola, though she later worked under the name Cassandra Gava. She has spoken in interviews about how uncomfortable the transformation makeup actually was to wear, describing prosthetic teeth and hairpieces that made the shoot far less glamorous than the finished scene suggests. Gava's film and television career continued through the 1980s and into the 1990s in supporting roles, but she never became a household name in the way some of her Conan castmates did. Like several members of this cast, she has kept her personal life largely private in the years since, and detailed public information about her current whereabouts is limited. What's clear is that, unlike some of her contemporaries, she never built a second career out of trading on her Conan notoriety, choosing instead to let the role stand on its own as a small but memorable piece of early 1980s fantasy cinema. It's a reminder that not every actor from a cult classic goes on to give retrospective interviews or appear at fan conventions decades later. Some simply move on with their lives, and the character they played stays exactly as vivid and exactly as mysterious as it was on the day the film came out. If you've ever quoted the opening narration of Conan the Barbarian, the line about what is best in life, you were quoting Mako, the actor who played the Wizard of the Mounds and narrated the entire film. Mako's real story is, in many ways, more remarkable than the character he played. He was born Makoto Iwamatsu in Kobe, Japan, in December 1933, the son of two well-known children's book authors and illustrators. His parents relocated to the United States shortly before the outbreak of World War II, leaving young Mako in Japan with his grandmother, because his parents were political dissidents working for the U.S. Office of War Information during the war. They were not interned, and they arranged for their son to join them in New York in 1949, when he was 15. He has said in interviews that he learned much of his English from watching American films, which makes it a particularly striking detail that he would go on to build a decades-long acting career in that same language. After serving in the U.S. Army during the Korean War, Mako trained at the Pasadena Playhouse and adopted the single-stage name Mako because he found that audiences and casting directors struggled with his full name. He earned an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor for his role in 1960 Essex's The Sand Pebbles opposite Steve McQueen, becoming one of the first Asian-American actors nominated in that category. Alongside his screen work, Mako co-founded the East-West Players in Los Angeles, now recognized as one of the longest-running Asian-American theater companies in the country, a project he sustained for years while continuing to take film and television roles. Mako's career carried on well beyond Conan, including voice work as Aku in Samurai Jack and as the beloved Uncle Iroh in the first 2 seasons of Avatar, The Last Airbender, a role that fans continue to honor on screen even after his death, with the character's final storyline dedicated to him, and a later character in the sequel series The Legend of Korra named in his memory. He died of esophageal cancer on July 21, 2006, at his home in Somis, California, at the age of 72. Remarkably, he had recorded his voice work for the animated film TMNT the day before he passed, and the finished movie was dedicated to his memory. Across a 165 production career spanning 5 decades, Mako was repeatedly credited by later Asian American performers as one of the actors who made it possible for them to find work in an industry that had, for most of his early career, offered them almost nothing but stereotypes. Thulsa Doom's towering, mustachioed enforcer Rexer very nearly beats Conan in the film's climactic battle, and the man playing brought a genuine physical menace to the role because he had spent over a decade building it in real life. Ben Davidson was, before he was ever an actor, one of the most feared defensive ends in professional football. Born in Los Angeles in June 1940, Davidson played college football at the University of Washington before entering the NFL, eventually becoming a fixture of the Oakland Raiders throughout their rough-and-tumble run in the American Football League during the 1960s. Standing 6'8" with a signature handlebar mustache, Davidson earned 3 AFL All-Star selections and played in Super Bowl II. He became infamous around the league for a brutal hit on Kansas City Chiefs quarterback Len Dawson in 1970, a play so violent it led directly to a rule change that the league informally nicknamed after him. Once his playing career wound down, Davidson moved into acting, appearing in films like MASH and later Conan the Barbarian, and he became a familiar face to television audiences through a long-running series of Miller Lite beer commercials that traded on his tough guy image. Conan the Barbarian remained his most substantial film role, and it made sense of physical presence that football fans already associate with intimidation, the same 6'8" frame and handlebar mustache that had once made Chiefs and Jets fans wary now made him perfectly cast as the warrior standing between Conan and his revenge. In the early 2000s, he was diagnosed with prostate cancer, and he fought the illness for years largely outside the public eye. Ben Davidson died on July 2, 2012, in San Diego, California, at the age of 72, survived by his wife and 3 daughters. Coincidentally, his former Raiders teammate and close friend Tom Keating died of the same disease just 2 months later. The most iconic female role in the film belongs to Valeria, the thief and warrior who fights alongside Conan and ultimately dies protecting him. The actress was Sandahl